So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am Javier, the Executive Director of NAMI Central Texas. We are very excited to host October's Mind Matters. Latosha Knight is a holistic therapist who offers individual, couples, and group therapy services through her private practice. Tonight, Latosha will focus on grief and loss. If you have any questions for Latosha, please put them in the chat and I will ask her after her presentation. If you could mute yourself while Latosha is speaking, that would be great so we don't get any feedback. Latosha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Javier. So welcome, everybody. I want to start tonight, if my clicker will work, here we go, with a welcome to you. I want to congratulate you all for being here. Grief is not an easy topic. Definitely not one that we openly talk about in our society. Yet you're still here. This is a testament to your commitment, and I want to applaud you for that. Secondly, I want to share some mind-blowing statistics with you to illustrate just how pervasive grief is in our society. First, 8 million people a year experience a loss due to death. The divorce rate is upwards of 45%. Aside from divorce, millions of relationships end annually, not only affecting the couple, but the parents, the children, other relatives and friends, and other family. It's estimated that more than 14 million pets are lost annually, and that's just in the United States. When you add the many millions of loss experiences related to retirement, job loss or change, medical problems, major financial changes, the numbers can be staggering. So in short, loss is inevitable, even predictable at times. I mean, we know that changes are coming. We know that death is coming, right? But despite these facts, we receive no formal training in how to respond to events that are guaranteed to happen and sure to cause pain and disruption. So tonight, we're here to learn about how to deal more effectively with grief in hopes of a new beginning. So Javier gave me a brief introduction, but I want to share with you a little bit why grief is so close to home for me, and why I've kind of taken it on as a mission, so to speak, that we're able to normalize the process of grief and find safe places to actually talk about our grief and be heard and be able to express it openly. So like I said, I am a licensed professional counselor, holistic practitioner, and a grief recovery specialist. As a professional, I have helped and taught countless people about grief and loss. Aside from, all of the kind of peripheral losses that I just talked about, job losses, moves, changes, kind of empty nesting, my daughter growing up and leaving the house and things like that. My two most significant emotional losses and to date have been my grandmother and my mom. My grandmother suddenly died in 1999. I was 23 years old. And that was the first significant loss I had experienced in my life. And nobody had talked to me about how to deal with the grief, who to talk to or anything. And though we were all grieving and we knew it, none of us talked to each other. I didn't want to burden my mom with my grief because it was her mom. I didn't want to burden my sister because it was her grandma, and I'm assuming that they maybe felt the same way. And so we were all kind of just moving around each other grieving, but nobody was talking about it. In 2022, just over a year ago, overnight, my mom was suddenly incapacitated. She couldn't talk, she couldn't walk, and she was essentially gone, but still here. And so nothing, I mean, it knocked me off my feet. Nothing I had learned, nothing I had taught or, helped anybody through prepared me for this type of loss. There was an enormous weight, sadness, mixed bag of emotions, and I was lost. I didn't know what to do with it. And in addition to this new type of loss, all the feelings I thought I had resolved related to my grandmother's death came rushing back. So I started on this search for a more effective way to deal with my grief. The grief recovery method is what I found, and it was extremely helpful in my recovery. The information I share with you tonight is from the research conducted to create this program. So some objectives I have for us tonight. I want to offer some definitions of grief to help you understand it from a feeling and heart perspective. We often intellectualize grief. We know up here in our heads what grief is, but we don't often get into to the feelings in the heart part of grief. We're going to talk about when and where grief takes root, why grief is so misunderstood, and we'll talk about some ways to relieve our own grief and how to help other people we encounter with their grief. So first, grief is normal and natural. I almost want to, like put that on bumper stickers and t-shirts, right? It is what we're supposed to do when we lose something. It's a natural reaction to change or loss of any kind. And it is often misdiagnosed and therefore mistreated. I think we know that grief can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, stress, PTSD. We have all kinds of labels, we call it complicated grief and things like that. And these titles and labels tend to only further complicate our grief process. Because grief can turn into depression or mimic depression or overlap some symptoms of depression. But if we just treat the depression, the grief is still there. And so, imagine going through months of therapy or help of any kind for your depression, and then still having these gnawing, nagging feelings. And it's like, okay, I thought I addressed this, but I'm still hurting. Like, what do I do? Right. And so it can really complicate things. And in essence, grief by any other name is still grief. We have to address the grief. Definition number 2, grief is how we respond to the change or end of familiar patterns. Changes like graduations, like I mentioned with my daughter, I'm on one hand, I'm very excited that my daughter has, made this achievement. She's going on to the next phase of her life. I'm also sad because she's leaving. In my situation, she moved across the country, and I'm used to seeing her every day. And so it can be about these conflicting emotions and not really knowing how to reconcile feeling two totally conflicting ways. Another example is, when someone you love dies after suffering from a long illness, you may feel a sense of relief that your loved one's suffering is over, which is a positive feeling, even though it's associated with death. But at the same time, you may realize that you can no longer see or touch that person, and that can be very painful, right? And so, yeah, it can be this mix, like I said, of conflicting feelings that can sometimes come with the change in a pattern or behaviors. One more extremely poignant definition. When I heard this, it just really grabbed me. Um, the loss or death of a loved one can produce emotions that can be described as the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there for you, only to find out that when you need them one more time, they're not there. Right. And then with a problematic relationship, because we don't always have loving feelings for everybody in our life, right? And so with a problematic relationship, someone with someone you've lost or who has died, we might call this relationship a less than loved one. And for you, the feeling may be one of reaching out for someone who's never been there for you, only to find out when you need them one more time, they're still not there. So, what causes grief? Um, when and where does grief take root? Short answer, we know loss creates grief, right? But where does it really take root and become this thing that we carry around and can't seem to process and get over? It starts in childhood. That's a little kid there with a balloon. We go about our lives and we start experiencing losses pretty early on, right? And if you think about the many things that kids, each phase of life, you take bottle for mom's breast, you take the pacifier, they leave whoever their caregiver was, they started school, and they leave elementary school, they go to middle school, and then high school, and all of these can be considered losses that become these rocks that we just pick up and we put in our backpack. Nobody ever teaches us how to deal with them. We don't really talk about it. We don't have a place to express these things and really be heard. And so we end up with this heavy backpack. And of course, as we age, these rocks get bigger, right? They don't get smaller. And so we have all of these rocks. And then as we get older, the losses can potentially become more and more significant and weigh us down even more. So I want everybody to take a minute and see if you can think of some rocks that you may still be carrying around in your backpack. And just if you're comfortable, throw them in the chat. What are some of your rocks that are still in your backpack? And rocks can include any loss, any change in your life. Pets, um, divorces, recovery, separations, moves, pregnancy, loss of freedom sometimes that come with having a new baby. And then the graduations that I've talked about. And so what do we have here? Childhood trauma, absolutely. Being ignored by the adults that surrounded me. Watching my father abuse my mother, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're gonna talk about these losses next. Because they're not tangible. They're not really tangible losses, right? And I don't know that a kid could articulate what they lost by watching their mom be abused
I
by
was
their dad.
abused and my brother's death.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. Divorce after 35 years. Wow. Yeah. And it's common, that if you want the loss, like if you chose it, like if I choose to move, or if I choose to divorce or break up with a partner, that maybe I don't grieve. And that's not always true. It's still a loss. And even if there are things that you didn't like you get used to them and you miss them. You inevitably miss them. All right. So thank you guys for sharing. So the losses that I talked about, not being tangible and kids maybe not being able to articulate or express what they lost are called intangible losses. And intangible losses are often hard. Not only is it hard for kids, it's hard for adults too. It's very hard to conceptualize, articulate, and express these losses. And they're often attached to some kind of tangible loss. Not always, but they're often attached to a tangible loss. Some examples, losing expectations and trust when you divorce, or losing safety and security when a child loses a parent. I would imagine, I think it was Anissa that said she watched her mom being abused. My guess is that there was a loss of childhood, maybe, a loss of safety and security. Also, hopes and dreams that a parent may feel like they lost when they lose a child. Other intangible losses could include a loss of respect, a loss of your faith, or a loss of normalcy. Just feeling like you lost some kind of natural rhythm or familiar pattern. So, if we all experience grief and loss, why is it so misunderstood? Right? There's millions. The statistics say millions, but we can go on and guess that every human being loses something at some point, right? And so if it's such a common occurrence, why is it so misunderstood? Bottom line is we're just not prepared to deal with loss. We get training and we're more equipped to deal with minor accidents and crisis situations. We have first aid classes, health and safety classes. There's 911 for crisis situations. But where in any continuum of life do we learn about how to deal with the grief caused by significant emotional loss? And if anybody has a place, let me know. Put it in the chat. I know I didn't encounter anything, not my family, not school, not church. And that's not to slap anybody on the hand or anything. Because they typically don't know how to deal with it either. It's just kind of passed down. It's a big societal thing that that's just uncomfortable to talk about it. So we don't talk about it. And then on top of that, we have all these myths and things we say to each other because we don't know how to deal with it. And some of these are, on the screen here. I'm sorry. So again, in the chat, I want you to think about some of the myths you have about grief and ways you've indirectly learned to deal with grief. I know
some guy who my mom talked to said anybody who kills themselves go to hell. My mom was like, that's hurtful to us because that's what my brother did.
Absolutely. And what's your reaction to that? What do you walk away
That makes me
feeling?
mad at that guy.
Yeah. And I would imagine that it shut you down a little bit. You'll be hesitant to share it. Because
I'm sure my brother's in heaven,
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else? What are some myths you have about grief, or that you've learned indirectly?
That's a good one.
So I have a story time. There's a little boy in my life. and he had some fish. And I called him one day, just to talk to him. And, very soon into the conversation, he told me that his fish died. And so, I had just taken this program, and I'm armed with this new knowledge of how to deal with grief, what to say, what not to say. So I said, "Oh, that must be hard. How do you feel about that? Tell me how you feel." And he said, "Oh, it's okay. My mom said she'll get me a new one." And so that's kind of how we learn. Um, and again, mom is well-meaning. Nobody wants to see the people they love experience hurt. And so we say things and we do things wanting to help, but again, we're just ill-equipped. We don't really know what to do, and we end up kind of perpetuating these ineffective strategies of dealing with grief and loss. So another reason why grief is so misunderstood, I want you guys to imagine with me for a little while, a steam kettle filled with water. The flame under the kettle is turned up high. Normally, as the water heats and boils, the steam generated by the heat releases through the spout. Most kettles are fitted that little whistle on the top to notify us when the water has reached the boiling point. Imagine that same steam kettle filled with water with a high flame burning and a cork jammed into the spout. All right. Imagine the pressure that builds up inside that kettle when the spout can't release the built up energy. The cork represents a lifetime of misinformation that causes us to believe that we are not supposed to talk about sad, painful, or negative emotions. A healthy steam kettle releases energy immediately as it builds up. When we're told things like, don't feel bad, life goes on, gotta be strong, the energy just stays inside. If we think about the myth that time heals, which is my myth, my grief myth, or it was with my grandmother's death. It'll just take time. It'll just take time. It'll just take time, right? But if we think about that myth in terms of the steam kettle analogy, time only moves the steam kettle closer to explosion, right? And it's not really releasing. And we're just, boiling more and more and making our way to explosion. So as the pressure builds in our personal steam kettle, we automatically seek relief. And this is when we may start to participate in what we call short-term energy relieving behaviors. And they're on the screen here. These are all the things that you can overdo in order to numb, avoid, get away from that pent-up energy. We participate, they're also called STIRBs for short, but we participate in these STIRBs because they work. But only short-term. The true emotional issue. Lastly, to remove the cork that's jammed in the spout. We also participate in STIRBs because we have been socialized with the idea that we should cover up emotional pain rather than confront it directly. It's important to remember that we are not defective because we participate in these STIRBs. We just don't know what else to do. And we want relief. So we have all these rocks in our backpack, right? We have the myths swirling around in our heads, the steam kettle is boiling, and someone asks us how we're doing, or we ask someone how they're doing. What do we say? Oh, I'm fine. which is often a lie, right? Who likes to be lied to? Anybody here likes to be lied to? I don't like to be lied to, but we do it. We do it to each other all the time, right? We call this Academy Award recovery, or put on your happy face, or be okay for your family and friends. We're literally taught to act recovered. And I said this before, but we tend to intellectualize grief by saying things like, be thankful you have another son, or he's in a better place. She led a full life. You'll find someone else, right? And again, these people are well-meaning, right? They mean well. But these statements are largely unhelpful. They do not help grievers at all, right? And so we, in fact, know that the loss may be intellectual, but the reaction, which is grief, is purely emotional. And that's typically what we're trying to convey when we talk about our losses. And that's typically what we want people to hear when we talk about our losses. Has anybody heard comments like this? Show of hands. Absolutely. So like I said, when we get these unhelpful comments, it increases our sense of isolation, kind of like what you talked about, Ashley. It would be hard to keep sharing that with people if that is what you get back, or those are the kinds of comments you get back. And so, we inevitably start feeling judged, evaluated, even criticized. And so we start to act recovered just to be treated in an acceptable manner. And we just stuff it. And so all of these things become our BS, our belief system. We create the system and process of coping that just is not effective. And we hold tight to these beliefs, even though they don't really work. And we resist anyone who tries to tell us differently, because somewhere there in there, we know we don't have anything else. At least it works short term. And we pass the BS down generation to generation. Kids are watching us. They take cues from us. When I was in second grade, my grandfather died. And again, it didn't feel really big to me because, I was young or didn't really know about loss or whatever. But again, nobody talked to me about the loss, but I watched my mom every night cry about it. I watched her cry about it. I watched her never talk about it, and then I watched her cry about it. And so that taught me that you grieve by yourself. And maybe we just don't talk about it. You just deal with it by yourself. Right. And so not only do we develop our own belief systems, but we end up passing that belief system down. So how do we lighten the load? How do we relieve the grief we carry, remove some of these rocks from the backpack? We don't often hear the word recovery used in the context of grief. But what recovery means in the grief recovery method process is feeling better, claiming your circumstances instead of your circumstances claiming you, finding new meaning for living without the fear of being hurt again, being able to enjoy fond memories without having that turn into painful feelings, acknowledging that it's all right to feel sad from time to time, and talk about those feelings no matter how anybody around you reacts. Being able to forgive others when they say or do things that are based on their lack of knowledge about grief. Recovery is one day realizing that your ability to talk about the loss you've experienced is indeed normal and healthy. Most important, recovery means acquiring the skills that we should have been taught a long time ago. These are the skills that allow us to deal with loss directly. So, recovery comes by learning. Learning to make a series of small positive changes in our attitudes about grief first, and then our behaviors. Recovery is processing what was left incomplete as a result of a loss, which means getting better, not necessarily healed, because healing is an ongoing process. Recovery comes sooner with positive actions. It's not about time, it's about what you do with the time. And recovery comes sooner with appropriate support, that safe place to express and be heard. And so again, I'm gonna ask you, what support systems do you have, or does your I say agency, but that's anybody that offers anything in the way of wellness for you. And that could be the spiritual realm. Some employers have wellness programs. Wherever you seek these wellness things, is grief a part of that wellness? Grief support part of that wellness. And so Anissa says, yes. Was that to that question, Anissa? Okay. And Nami, yes. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And so some ways we can help others relieve the grief they carry is the validating and acknowledging grief and trauma, avoiding the myth statements and unhelpful comments. Validation can look like statements like, I can imagine what you're going through, or that must be really painful. Helping them to identify and name the loss, tangible and intangible. Helping to name the feelings. And so typically we talk through stories. And so someone might come and tell us the story about how they lost something or someone. But what they really want us to hear is how it feels. And so if we can help them name those feelings, that must be hard. Oh, that sounds really sad. That sounds devastating. And so just helping, and even if you're wrong, it helps them to search for the right thing. You're still helping, even if the feeling you throw out is not exactly the one that they're feeling. And lastly, just being a big heart with ears. Listening is probably one of the biggest and best things you can do for your friends and family that come to you and talk about their losses. And so what has been helpful? Again, in the chat, or you can take yourself off of mute and just share it verbally. But what are some of the things that have been helpful for you in dealing with your grief?
For me, it's been journaling, and it's just writing down exactly what I feel, even if it's detrimental. And I don't save it. I throw it away because it no longer serves me. But journaling has really, really helped a lot because I isolate myself a lot and I've been dismissed. So I've got to learn how to deal with the emotions on my own until I found this group who is showing me how to deal with the trauma and emotions that I've had.
Thank you, Polly. Anita, I think you were going to say something.
Yes, ma'am. I can say what helped me the most during my journey was connecting with other mothers that had lost children. I felt like they knew my pain without me having to even speak those words, because there were words that just, I guess I couldn't even put together to explain how I felt. I have close friends, my mom and all that, but nobody really understood exactly what I was going through and still going through. And it was other mothers that have lost their children that helped me, and talking with them, and just, I think it gave me a sense of, I don't know, security, of not feeling like, hey, I'm not crazy, because that's what I felt like. You know,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
faced with all these different emotions that you've never felt before. And it helped me to know that I wasn't alone in this journey. So I that was my biggest supporter outside my pastor, who has continuously stayed close to me since everything happened. But yeah.
Good deal. Thank you for sharing. And Ashley, did you have something?
I have a Bible.
Mm-hmm.
That helps.
Absolutely. All right. I thank everybody for sharing the things that have been helpful for them. It can be sometimes hard and a long journey to finally find that thing that actually hits the spot, so to speak. So, how the grief recovery method might become a part of your community. And so, like I talked about before, if as a leader, an employee, employer, faith-based leader, teacher, coach, counselor, what are your top health and wellness priorities, and how do they fit in with what you've learned today about grief? And they're typically just aren't. It's more of a reactive thing than a proactive thing. We don't do a lot of talking about grief and how to handle it before we need it. It's typically, after something happens that we even look or seek out that kind of information. And do you or the people you serve have access to grief support that offers hope and recovery? The grief recovery method is a ready-made intervention that improves hope. It involves storytelling, which helps us make meaning of our losses. It gives voice to undelivered communication, and so you actually go back, and all of those unmet dreams and expectations and things you never got to say, you go back and kind of close the loop on all of that. It's a systematic approach, so it helps organize thoughts and feelings. It is the only evidence-based grief program out there, and it's action-based. We show you how to process your grief step by step. It's been around for 40 years, 6 continents, 20 plus languages, and thousands of people have been trained in the grief recovery method. If you're interested at all in your own grief recovery or getting to know more about the program, please contact me. Even if it's just, we're going to take some questions here, but when we leave here, other questions may come up. And so I want you to feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions that may come up. So in conclusion, grief is normal and natural. There's nothing wrong with you because you emotionally react or respond to the losses in your life. The problem is that we haven't been taught. We haven't been taught what to do with these feelings and these emotions that come up after a loss, and we're just ill prepared. We're ill prepared to deal with our own losses, ill prepared to help the people we love with their losses. And lastly, there's hope. There's hope. I know firsthand what this program can do, and it really helped me start a new chapter with my mom. She's still in the same condition here, but not here. And the hardest part for me was like, what do you do with that? It's not really a loss because she's still here, but the relationship definitely changed because I can't talk to her anymore. And she doesn't move around and, and do the things she used to do. And so, going through this process and going back and delivering all those undelivered communications and, making my peace with unfinished emotional business related to that relationship is what helped me to just really accept where she is right now and start developing new ways to create a relationship with the woman who's here now, if that makes sense. As a gift for coming tonight, there is a free grief recovery ebook. It has a lot of the information in it that we've talked about tonight. If you're on a laptop or a separate device from your phone, you can use the QR code there. Otherwise, that is the URL. You can just kind of type in Latosha Thomas, LPC.com / the grief recovery method. And that free book is available out there. And so now we'll take a little time for some questions, some comments that you may have.
Can you have both depression and grief?
Absolutely.
Because I have both.
Absolutely. And like I said, grief often can turn into depression or PTSD or anxiety disorders and things like that. And they're still separate. You can take care of the anxiety and the depression, and the grief is still there. You don't really touch the grief. And so addressing both of them is what's really helpful.
And I feel understanding what you had said is you're treating the depression, which we did, but I didn't realize the grief was still there until you said it. It's like, why can't I get over this hump? Because I can't process this grief.
Right.
It's harder to process the grief because your medication and it numbs you to things, or it numbed me to things, which got me through the transition, but it never took away my grief. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem.
I have a question. So, in the beginning, me and my children, my family, we went to grief counseling, and it was the free 6 they usually come with what your job provides or whatnot. And that was a family session, which I'm still in therapy today. But my question is, me and my children, we will talk about my son, just in general things he did or just memories and like that. But they don't talk to me about their grief. And I think because they don't want to hurt me anymore. But then again, I don't know how to approach them either.
Sure.
So I guess,
Excuse me, what are the ages?
23 and 30 and 13.
Okay, so a wide range.
Mhm.
of ages and phases of life. Um, how do they respond when you ask questions, or do you ask direct questions about what they're going through and what they're feeling?
I don't ask direct questions. It's kind of general, like, "Hey, how you doing?" Or,
Yeah,
if it's something like we celebrate his birthday or anniversary, I kind of check on him, "How you doing?" But just to be real direct, I don't. And so I don't know if I do it subconsciously because I'm scared of what they might say and that I can't say anything to help them. And I don't know, but just the more I think about it, I feel like I need to do something because I imagine that they're going through grief just like I am. And I'm struggling still. 2.5 years later, I'm still struggling.
absolutely. Yeah. And, not only is it difficult to help someone through their grief, it compounds it significantly when you're going when you're going through the same loss as the people you're trying to help. So I can't imagine what that's like. But if we go back to the slide where I talked about here, I'll go back. The slide where we talked about how to help each other with our grief, validate and acknowledge what you think they may be feeling. Like on the birthday, kind of opening up the conversation of this must be hard for you. Um, or sharing that it's really hard for you. Like I want to celebrate him um because I want to honor him and never forget his presence. But it's really hard, and it must be hard for you guys too. And so opening it up and kind of creating this space where it is okay to talk about your feelings by showing them that you're willing to talk about your feelings with them, helping them identify and name the, the loss, but even the intangible things they may have lost as a result of losing their brother. And then name helping them name their feelings, giving them words for what they may be feeling. Because especially with kids, again, we're not taught a lot of emotional things, period. Especially as kids. And so we don't have a wide emotional vocabulary. And so giving them those words that could help them express the way they're feeling. And then, once the space is comfortable and they feel a little more comfortable expressing themselves, um, giving them that voice and just being willing to listen.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And anybody else? All right. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. And I thank you again for coming out tonight and being a part of this Mind Matters. Again, like I said, grief is not an easy topic. It's definitely not one that we rush home from work to hop on a webinar for. So thanks. I thank all of you again for being here. And please reach out. One-on-one support is ongoing, and that's where we kind of walk through the process together, you and I. And then I offer it as a group as well, where you walk through the process with a group of other grievers. So yes, reach out if you want more information. If a presentation like this is helpful anywhere in your life, at church, for your family, for your workplace, reach out for that as well. I'm willing to do that as well. I really want grief to be more normalized in our society, and not such a taboo topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
so much. I
right.
appreciate you.
No problem. Take care.
I'll be in touch.
Alrighty.